everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the BSOC Bulletin podcast by the UNSW Business Society. I'm Adrian and I'm here with Britney. And this week we're going to be talking with Jenny Chu. Jenny Chu graduated from UNSW with a degree in information systems, and she has a wide range of experience in product management, and she's currently the head of product at Eucalyptus. Just as a start, Jenny, what is something in the brief recap that I mentioned that we don't really know about you?
Before product management, I was an aspiring product designer / UX designer. So I guess as I was a self-taught designer since I was a kid. I sort of started looking into Adobe Photoshop and stuff like that when I was 10 or 12, trying to build my own new pets website or something like that. And so since then, I was always interested in in design, not necessarily product design, but as you kind of get older and you go into high school, those creative dreams start to die. And I actually started my first year at uni doing a science degree, hoping to get into optometry. And then I changed my degree a few times and eventually got into tech. So I guess that's a little bit about me before my product management and tech world.
Yeah, and I guess just expanding on that, are you able to give a brief introduction of yourself and your experience in both professionally and I guess out of the career world as well since graduating from UNSW?
Yeah, so I guess since I graduated with an information systems degree, I kind of dabbled. I guess actually no, it probably starts before that. During uni, I dabbled in a lot of different startups while I was studying. Doing a lot of generalist roles. So a lot of I was kind of hired as the first employee of a startup, went through an accelerator program, moved around in startups, dabbled a little bit in consultancy, randomly got into this role that was a product manager role. It was actually before Atlassian. And I didn't really know what that job sort of entailed, but it was sort of an all-rounder role that's trying to get this software up and running. And that was my first taste of product management, even though it was just me and one developer. We were really, really small. I was able to understand what does a product that the role actually exists in the world. And I guess when I started nearing my graduation, I had a look at where do I sort of want to go, and I could stay in startups and sort of continue this generalist path, or I could actually go into grad programs or internships, which you only really have 1 or 2 chances in your life to actually do. And so I started applying for a couple of roles, and the only one that really, really stood out to me was the Atlassian program. Funnily enough, I applied for the design and product management role, and I only got into the product management one. So I think a lot of people nowadays really want to get into product management, but for me, I suppose it was a bit of luck, a bit of chance, I suppose. And so since then, I did the grad program at Atlassian, the associate product management program, and eventually wanted to go back into startups. And so I reached out to an old colleague of mine who is now the CEO of Eucalyptus, Tim, and kind of asked for a job essentially, because I guess one of the things I always wanted to work in was healthcare, one of the big passion areas for me. And knowing what Eucalyptus does, it was kind of the perfect fit for me.
Right. I guess just out of curiosity, what were some of the startups that you took part in?
The very first one was a company called YouChoose. It was a Marudi startup accelerator back in the day when I guess accelerators were more commonplace. And then there was a superannuation fund when superannuation startups were the big rage, and it was focused at women. And so that company was called Human Super. It's now called Fairvine. Yeah, I guess those are kind of the 2 main ones.
Yeah, I think taking it back to university, what were some of the memories that you miss most from uni?
Oh, I think my favorite part about university was, well, when I first started university, there was very little startup and technology scene at all. I don't think it really popped until the Michael Crouch Innovation Center actually came to be. So the MCIC, if you guys know it now. And that only really came, I think, in my 2nd or 3rd year. And that's when all of these startup and tech meetups, which I assume in the last 2 years, no one has really gone to any. But when we were allowed to actually go into in-person meetups and events, every single semester had every single week probably had at least like one or two things you can just pop by and learn about JavaScript, learn about products. Sometimes there was even like a talk by Guy Kawasaki, one of the first employees of Apple, that would just like pop up on campus. And there was like accelerator programs, and there was like, I actually like was working at the MCIC as an like catalyst in residence or something. And now they have like the founders program. So I think I really, really miss actually that aspect, where I think in the US, like a lot of universities have that strong startup culture, and it was really great at UNSW. At least in my time there, we actually had a little bit of that, because I imagine people that were there before me didn't even get to taste any of that.
Yeah, I think that like that whole startup culture and entrepreneurial mindset has really continued on, like even now, like because we're in uni, we see a lot of people wanting to start their own businesses and startups around us. And so I guess like kind of moving more into your personal role, like imagine I'm 5 years old, like what is product management in a nutshell?
I always use the example, like if you were a product manager, let's say on the Facebook Messenger app or Instagram, or I guess like whatever app you guys kind of use often. But let's say you're a product manager on the Instagram app. There is someone out there at Instagram that has to take into consideration of where the business needs to head, or what customers or like the users of the apps actually need, and then translate that into a certain feature or thing that you interface with. So someone, like there was someone behind actually deciding to do, I guess, the story feature, for example, on Instagram. While not might not be like solely the product manager, it's that person that drives it. So from idea, from working with designers on how it might look like, from working with engineers on how it should work technically, to actually releasing that feature, someone that sort of drives the end to end of that kind of feature, I suppose.
Yeah, diving more into the process of product management, are you able to give some insight into some of the key stakeholders that you work with?
Yeah, I think depending on the company, and also as the bigger the company gets, the more stakeholders you usually have to do. But I think stakeholder management is one of the key parts of product management. But the closest people you usually work with is the engineers and the designer. So pretty much the people that actually build the actual feature or product that you see. And oftentimes, because your role is so critical, you do get a lot of stakeholders that are like leadership stakeholders. So not only am I working really closely with my own team, which is like the engineers and designer, I spend a lot of time with, even at Atlassian, we used to do this thing where you get to talk to like Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar about the work you do. So you might do it in presentation form. So you kind of have to like manage up, I suppose. And I guess that's a big part of the role. Other than that, also you might interface with marketing on like how you market that feature, or how that feature might affect like marketing metrics. At Eucalyptus today, I have to work with the operations and supply chain team quite a lot, because the way that Eucalyptus brands work is it's not only just like a web experience. There's a very huge offline experience that we have to help as well from a product point of view. So honestly, it's one of the few roles in an organization where you have to work with a lot of different people.
Yeah, going into more depth on those stakeholders that you mentioned, like engineers and such, do you think there's any challenges when you're trying to communicate an idea to them and try to make your idea a reality?
Yeah, quite a lot. And not just engineers. I think after a few years in product management, I think being able to communicate to different people with different backgrounds and different understanding is a whole art in itself. And so I'm actually now most comfortable talking to engineers because I worked with them so much. But I remember at the very beginning, you might say one thing and they might take a little, like a very different understanding of it. So there's a lot of challenges in terms of being aligned on the same page, trying not to get too, I guess, technical. But I think as you kind of speak to them and you try different methods of like communications, like if you're not really great at talking, maybe like writing is a better way. Because sometimes when I talk to engineers, and I'm not from a technical background, right? Sometimes they might go too into technical and I might only understand like 50% of it. And same thing with me, they might not have the business context I have, and hence they might not know why a certain thing is so important. And so I essentially just like either catch up with them more often and be like, hey, like I might have to follow up with some questions because I really only understood 50% of it. So I'll have a think and then come back to you. Or I might try different modes of actually communicating. So for me, my favorite way of communicating is like written text. So actually writing documentation and then allowing people to actually ask questions asynchronously, like on comments, actually allows me to, highlight anything that I might not let them, like they might not understand. And then I can answer that like asynchronously as well, because I really struggle communicating, I suppose, like face to face, because you need that time to reflect and really understand complex concepts, I suppose.
I kind of wanted to go into more depth on requirements analysis because especially now, because I'm currently studying commerce and computer science, and part of the computer science degree is we get to get hands-on with a few projects, and the way that they kind of assess us and mark us is they provide us with like a specification in a way, and it kind of has the key ideas there and the key requirements of what we need to build in a way, but there's still a lot of ambiguity in how we can interpret that. So I guess comparing those experiences, would you say that's similar to when you mentioned that you kind of communicate those ideas through documentation?
We do in terms of like, let's assume as a product manager, I've gathered all the requirements and I've like talked to customers and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm actually, I guess for what I try to do, even when I start talking to customers and doing research, I might invite engineers with me so that they actually like know what the customer said and I don't have to like replay it. It's very different from me telling them that's what they said or them versus them actually coming with me and experiencing it. And if I do like competitive research or if I do markets research, I document and I share that. So even when I actually write the specification document that you sort of see, they already have this prior knowledge on how I sort of got there, which avoids a lot of questions that they might have once you actually reach the like spec writing. Product managers do write what we call like feature specs or product specs. It usually is written. And then I also communicate it verbally as well by, I guess, like actually just having a meeting, but at least there's this like document that we can always reference and we always have like a source of truth. But it's a combination of good documentation, catching up with them regularly. So you have like the whole agile process of like stand-ups every single day, you have sprint planning, you have retros. So not only do you have documentation, you always have these points of contact that you can always clarify. And those stand-ups are meant to be chances where engineers can bring up blockers or questions they might have, and we can kind of work on it together. So it's a very highly collaborative process building features and building tech.
Yeah, I guess kind of going on a bit of a tangent now, because product management isn't really something you can specialize in at UNSW in terms of like coursework. Like, what would you say are the qualifications or skills needed to become a product manager from like a student's perspective?
It's a hard one because, like you said, there's no degree that perfectly suits it at all. I think like a computer science degree is always helpful because you can at least understand like how things are sort of made. My information systems degree was also really helpful. Like a lot of Atlassian graduates tend to come from a combination of Infosys and computer science degrees. That being said, I don't think is like exhaustive list. I actually think having some sort of experience while at uni, whether it's by doing your own side project, your own startup, joining a startup is probably the most valuable. So it's definitely not one of those roles that have like a specific uni degree attached to it at all. If anything, it's probably like the opposite. So actually having hands-on experience, I feel like is one of the best ways to get like a grad job as a PM, I suppose.
Going into your comment on startups, how would you kind of recommend, or I guess in your experience, how did you find work at a startup?
Two ways. Probably not the most like, I guess, popular opinion of today. But at my very first startup, I worked for free. I sort of interned. And like most startups, I guess like really, really early stage startups don't often are able to sort of like pay for the interns. That being said, at Eucalyptus we do. So I think this is definitely like five years, like a bit longer than that, like a few years ago. But you have to have hustle a lot of the time. I think also because when I was studying, I had like I didn't feel like I really had very good like hard skills at that point. It was probably my first or second year of uni. I essentially just sort of like had an eye out for like internships. And so I got pretty lucky in my first one. But my second role, I was actually trying to get into UX design. And I actually remember cold emailing a lot of different places, probably like 50 people. And I think because I was so interested in going into UX design, part of me was okay with working for free, even if it meant me having like another job on the side. So like while at uni, I usually did like a couple of things that pays and a couple of things that sort of did it just for that experience, whether it be like helping out a friend on a side project, or it might be me doing some sort of society or organization or volunteering, any stuff like that, just because I feel like I wasn't, the most in demand employee, I suppose, given my skill set at that time. Obviously it's very different now, so I guess I kind of like hustled as much as I could for it. And I think it also involves you actually maybe going to events and knowing people and just like asking for a job.
Yeah, I guess for the perspective of students who currently don't really have much hands-on experience in something that's either UX design or product management, like how would you recommend them to kind of break into that sort of industry of either joining a startup or building a portfolio?
I think from a UX point of view, you could like, I think portfolio is always great. I actually felt like, at least for UX, you can actually demonstrate your skill by maybe doing some project, or it could be just like a very popular thing is like, what if I wanted to redesign the Spotify app? How would I sort of approach it? And just like doing a few of your own cases. Same thing with like being a developer as well, right? You can show your GitHub portfolio. All of these sort of things are quite actually in comparison. It's not easy to get a job, but it's easier to show and demonstrate. And I remember I used to do quite a few different, it might just be me showing like the stuff that I did for Uni Society, or it might be like a volunteer project that I sort of did as well. So I showed a lot of that when I was trying to be a designer. As for product management, it's quite hard. Like the best things for you to show is actually a startup or like a side project you actually had. The thing for me, and it doesn't have to be a startup, it could be like a blog, or it could be some sort of passion you put energy in that has like some limited success. So for example, a lot of the, I guess like interns or graduates at the APM program at Atlassian, a lot of them did either like do something, whether it be like just a failed startup they had at uni. It could literally just be like tried to make an app and it didn't work. And maybe they went through an accelerator program. So I think there's like, now that at uni, there's heaps of like student accelerator programs, maybe it's like the UNSW founders program, all of those sort of things. Even going to any of those kind of help you like have a step into the startup world.
Yeah, I guess going into more about the professional experience you had at Atlassian and Eucalyptus, are you able to share some of the projects that you got to work on specifically?
Yeah, so I guess my internship project was doing a business case on whether Atlassian should expand sounds very technical and not very exciting, but I had to do a business case on whether we should expand our cloud regions. So actually setting up AWS data centers in different, I guess, like countries for performance reasons. And so I actually got approval from like the CTO of that. So that's actually a very like high profile project where you can essentially assess like the strategic value of setting up something in Singapore, for example, whether that would actually help like the APAC sort of region get more customers or performance benefit, for example. So that's one of my internship projects. Other stuff I did as an actual product manager, I suppose, at Atlassian was helping with their free and premium. So Atlassian used to be, I guess, like one pricing model. And so in the last like 2-3 years, we released a free version of Jira. We also released a premium version of Jira. I looked after, I guess, like the storage aspect of that. So how do we sort of give people limited storage for free so that they can upgrade to like the paid plans? And also what features would a premium customer sort of get from a storage and files point of view?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a way that I've noticed the industry is heading with that type of stuff, kind of offering a like try me product and then having the premiums via like subscription basis or what. So are you able to, I guess, compare this or contrast it to what you've done at Eucalyptus?
Yeah, I mean, at Eucalyptus, I was the first product person. So while at Atlassian, you sort of work on like one part of this huge ecosystem that affects like millions of users. I guess at Eucalyptus, I sort of drove the product from the ground up. I also kind of joined, I guess, about 1 year into when Eucalyptus sort of existed. So I was able to sort of shape the future of Eucalyptus quite early on. So I suppose it's not in terms of, well, I can sort of like name like the features that I sort of shipped at Atlassian. At Eucalyptus, I honestly probably up until now when I've started hiring a lot more product managers, like it's pretty much the whole product and owning the whole product. And I guess even to now, except I sort of like delegate different parts of it to the product managers I manage.
Yeah, I'm sure there's you've probably had experience through the whole process and journey of coming up with the idea and then following it and nurturing it through to its end. I guess, yeah, my question would be around what part of that process do you find most enjoyable?
Probably when we actually get to ship things. So you sort of work so hard doing all of the research. Sometimes development might take weeks, sometimes months, depending what you're doing. And I think like the day when you get to actually release it, put it out in the wild, and then to see like either the metrics go up or down, it could be both, or actually getting like customer feedback when they actually get to see it. Hopefully the feedback is actually positive. All of those things is probably my favorite part about being a product manager. So pretty much when you actually get to release things and actually the excitement that you sort of get from the team members around you as well. Because I think at the end of the day, like building a product is a team sport. It's very much like, I think the hardest part about building tech is it involves so many different people. And so collaborate, like you think like group work is already hard enough. This is like group work every single day, but I guess the lucky thing is like I will get to work with really, really great people. So I think having that sort of satisfaction of just like shipping something, seeing how the real world sort of plays with it is probably one of the most awesome things.
Yeah. I guess like what happens in the case of when you mentioned a bit in that answer, like what happens if when you ship something out, it doesn't really go as successfully as planned? Like in that case, what happens on the internal side?
So whenever you build a feature, hopefully you have some success metrics in mind on, like, hopefully you had a hypothesis on how it sort of should go, and then some idea of like whether it should go well or not. And I assume most people will assume that it'll go well. And then if it doesn't, you can kind of like, when it's a risky change, we sometimes do like progressive rollouts where you just roll it out to a percentage. Like if it's something that might affect revenue really, really hard and directly, we might roll it out a little bit so that the chance that if it's a bad change, the impact is lowered. And then if that's the case, we roll it back and we like don't ship it. Let's say we ship it and then it takes us like 3 months to realize that actually it's not very, very good. Then it's actually part of the product manager's job to like recognize that it's a failure, and then actually unship it, whether that be like taking it out again or reverting the change. But yeah, I guess like that's kind of just what happens. It's just staying vigilant on whether it's successful or not and monitoring metrics to make sure it's going in the direction you hoped it would. But otherwise, I guess that's, you kind of just like have to kind of recognize that, I suppose.
Yeah, going into the development of a product, are there any, like you, especially when you mentioned the risks involved and whether the idea could be successful or not, in your experience, has there been any restrictions on what, especially from a business perspective in terms of like cost, in what you can pursue and then what you can't?
Yeah, I mean, I think the role of the product manager is to realize the vision of the company. It's not about like what you want as a person, right? As a product manager, you are an employee. And actually recognizing that is the first step, because there's so many things I wish I could just build for my own selfish reasons, but if it doesn't help the company, if it doesn't help the customer, it's actually the product manager's job is to see through their own personal needs, I suppose. And so I work very, very closely with the CEO. And so whenever we do like product strategy and vision, we work together on it. And so we build this trust so that hopefully they trust me when I make decisions. But if there are like really big strategic decisions that changes, the shape of the company, then yeah, absolutely. I have to communicate that not only to the CEO, the founders, but also just like the general management team. If it's scoped to just, I guess, like a small change, I usually don't need to. But yeah, I think as long as it's within, like, that's why I guess every company needs a really strong vision, and like a strong strategy, because that's pretty much a way for us to tell whether this thing that we're doing is within the scope of this company. And then in terms of like cost, I guess the biggest cost in development is time. And so the faster you ship things, the quicker you'll realize the value. Because like if you take like 3 months to ship something, then it'll take 3 months to actually realize whether you were right or wrong about something. And so I guess that's why in terms of agile, like shipping often is one of the biggest principles that you can kind of do. And I guess that's kind of the main thing. It's like you have goals and you have, let's say, like quarterly goals, and within a quarter you have a set amount of people and resources that can do work. What's the best way for you to use that so that you can deliver said goals?
Yeah, it sounds like quite a process, especially like you mentioned with communicating to everyone. But kind of on the start of founding that idea, like it was kind of similar to when I mentioned requirements analysis in a way, but like how do you kind of know whether the idea that you're brainstorming actually caters for the need?
Hopefully you, at that point when you're ideating, you have some view of what customers want. Maybe it's a bit of feedback that you have that triggers a certain thing, or you saw data. So you might see like a drop in conversion rates, and then you dig in and you're like, oh, this is why there's a drop in like the conversion rates of like people paying for a product. So hopefully it comes from nothing. It doesn't come from nothing. And then if it is like a risky change, then there is a whole process that you might work with the designer on testing the idea with people, or actually getting some extra validation, whether that be sometimes what we do is like we send ads and we see like, hey, do people actually want this product? If they click on it, then that's like a sign that, hey, there's interest in it. So I think it really depends on how big the thing you're trying to do is and how risky it is. The more risky, the more validation you actually need. Maybe you need to send like surveys to validate that someone actually wants this product. But if it's sort of like you already have quite a lot of data that points to this direction, maybe you don't need to do that extra validation and you already have that validation. But I reckon validation is like a huge part of the process whenever you're like thinking of a new idea or like a new feature.
Yeah, I guess because I'm currently studying marketing myself, like it sounds super similar to the whole marketing research process at the moment. And so like just kind of understanding who your market is and what they want, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, like I guess like understanding customers is a core part of the job.
Yeah, I think taking a little bit of a break away from product management for a second, we noticed that you worked at Textbook Ventures. Are you able to give a brief rundown on what that is and like what students can get involved in?
Yeah, so I think while at uni, a few of me and my mates, I guess like David and Patrick were sort of the people that started Textbook Ventures. And I think echoing the fact that when we were at uni, there wasn't much around entrepreneurship and startups. And at that point, venture capital in general, Textbook Ventures sort of started to bring light to more student entrepreneurship. There's actually a couple of things in the US where there's like student-backed VC funds. So if you know like MIT and Stanford, like they produced a lot of great founders, great Silicon Valley CEOs. And so we were kind of taking that inspiration originally to kind of take a look at like what might it look like to be like a student VC fund. And we sort of pivoted a couple of years in, and I guess we sort of pivoted just to, I guess, raise the profile of student entrepreneurship. So that might just be doing more events to kind of encourage more people to get into startups, helping people answer questions. They often do a few events. I think just like a week or two ago, they did like an intro to crypto. So trying to catering towards like a wide variety of students. And I think one of the cool things, it's not uni specific. So you get to meet a lot of people from other like universities. I think a secondary thing that we really cared about is like, how do we sort of bring people of different skill sets, different backgrounds together, like, and actually just like get people involved in startups? Because sometimes we found that, hey, if you're a developer and you want someone to help design for you, maybe actually UTS people are great because they have a great viscom degree, for example.
Yeah, also going on another bit of a tangent, especially with like your mentions on US and like Silicon Valley, we kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the tech industry in Australia compared to the tech industry in, say, like America.
Yeah, I think the tech industry in America is really, really mature, right? So I think Australia in the last couple of years has really grown with companies like Atlassian kind of giving us like a stake in the global ground, I suppose. But I suppose in the, like even in product management, for example, one of the best ways to kind of compare is product management is probably one of the top careers. I think it actually took over management consultant as a grad job in the US. So that kind of gives you an idea of like where we are at in Australia. And that's also because, again, I think like the tech companies over there has hence like, because it's so competitive, the salaries are much higher. They get to actually, you know, recruit internationally. So overall, the bar is just a lot higher in terms of, I guess, like salaries, and also the fact that in America, you know, they give other benefits like health insurance and all of these sort of things that we sort of take for granted. And so tech is kind of one of the best places to work in that perspective. I feel like for a lot of people, tech in Australia is still in its early days, and a lot of people don't even know what it is. And that, you know, without a development background, you can still get involved either as like a product manager or like as a marketer and all of those sort of things. So still super, super early, but I think, you know, even in my like just me talking through this hour, you can kind of see how much the fact that we're sort of even talking about it on a BSOC podcast, it's a huge move. And so I think that's a really awesome thing.
Yeah, I guess just wrapping up now, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we kind of finish?
No, I think you know, I think COVID lockdown is kind of crap, but it's probably one of the best times to kind of learn a new skill. I see heaps of people trying to learn how to code. And I think also one of the biggest misconceptions, and I had this as well, is I always felt like coding was too hard. But I think once you actually get into it, it's still hard, but you can do it. um, and so like maybe like even just like learning some skills, doing some side projects, this might be one of the best times to actually do it, especially since the world has gone so digital since COVID has started. So definitely encourage that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with us.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It was really enjoyable.